Hello, everyone. This is Deborah Owen from Einstein's Secret, and I am really excited today to be able to introduce you to, now hopefully I get his name right, Guillaume Decugis. Decugis, I think you said, right? And Guillaume is originally from France. He's living in San Francisco, and he's actually one of the founding members of Scoop.it, which is a curation tool that I have just come to love. And I'm just really happy to have you here. Thanks for joining us, Guillaume.
Well, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, great. Well, why don't you just start by telling our audience a little bit about where you came from and how you got to where you are today, and especially why you got involved in Scoop It.
Yeah, so as I said, my name is Guillaume Decugis. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Scoop.it. I've been in technology for quite a long time. Did grad school here in the Bay Area at Stanford, actually. Um, then worked in the mobile industry in Europe. Did my first startup was a mobile music platform back 12 years ago now. Interesting times where mobile was exploding in Europe, and we had a lot of interesting stuff. The company was acquired, is now part of the of Microsoft, and
Okay.
we came out with the idea of Scoop It. Like we were, I've been working on a project in between, but 3 years ago, we were working on that project that was like only mildly successful. And Mark, who's my co-founder, and I were looking at, are we doing the right thing? Should we pivot to something different? And we realized that we had learned a lot working on content discovery and social media. But we felt that something was still missing for a lot of people. They were still struggling with social media and blogging. And if I can take a step back, I would think that the main idea behind Web 2.0 was really now everybody can be a media publisher. Now everybody can go online and be their own media, start a blog, be on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and be a media
Right.
and express themselves this way. And to be a lot of people do that, of course, but we felt that a lot of people were struggling with that. A lot of people were struggling with the time it takes to create content, good quality content, to maintain a blog, to maintain a social media presence. And we felt that we needed to create something to solve that. And we felt that by combining content curation with a very simple publishing platform, we could help people to complement whatever content they created with curated content, and that was going to be easier for them to do that and fulfill themselves, achieve, be able to build an audience around what they knew, what their areas of expertise. So that's really the starting point. We wanted to turn everyone into a media publisher, and we felt blogging was not delivering on that promise.
Yeah, yeah. I think blogging is, it can feel overwhelming unless you're really, really dedicated to doing it for whatever reason.
It's tough. I
Yeah,
mean, you know that,
yeah,
and it's like I took my own particular case. That was the starting point. When I was younger, when I was a teenager, I wanted to be a writer. So I had this idea of like very romantic idea of the writer, and I've always loved to write. So it's not a problem that I hate to write. I love to write, but I never find the time. I never find the inspiration,
hmm,
and you always have this very it's petrifying when you think like, oh, what am I going to write that's going to be so interested that people are going to share it? And I
right,
think it's much easier to actually, it's a much smoother way to become present online, to actually curate good content that you find is worth sharing. You don't have the pressure to create it, but you can enrich it with your own insights. You can give it some context. And I think for a lot of people, it's much easier to do, much more natural. And it could actually lead to identify what they should create and what they should write about.
right, right. And one of the things that I like about Scoop It is you can curate content, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, that other people have written, but there's also an easy way to add your own content right there. If you want to write a post, you can just go right ahead and do that, and that's easy to do. And
Yeah, and that's been our approach.
yeah,
It's not that you have on one hand people who create content, and on the other hand people who read, and then a third group of people who curate. We're all reading, creating, curating always.
right.
And I think it's a continuum. So we wanted to create a platform where you could start as easily as you wanted, like literally one-click publishing.
Right.
But of course, the more insights, as we call them, you add to enrich your posts, the better it's going to be for your audience. The more chances you'll have to be engaging.
Right.
And yeah, and you can even use Scoop.it as a light blogging platform by creating your own posts on it. And some people actually do that. They mix their creation and their curation.
Hmm.
And whether it's 50-50, 80-20, and then it's up to everyone to figure out what works best for them. But
Right.
we think of it as a continuum.
Yeah, it's great. It's a terrific platform. I really love it. Let's just back up a little bit for some people who may be a little bit uncertain. How would you define content curation? And as a high school educator, I'm looking at this both from a personal point of view, if I have my own Scoop It page, but also because I work with business students who are going to be going off to college and joining the workforce soon from a business perspective. What is content curation? How does it differ between the personal use and the business use, if it does?
So I would define it as the act of selecting, qualifying, enriching, and publishing and sharing quality content on a specific topic. So it's this idea that to me, if I was to give an image, I would say curation of what happened when we were teenagers and suddenly we discovered a great piece of music and want to share it with all the world and say, hey, you guys have to listen to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this moment where we feel we have a gem, something that's a great piece of content, and we want to share it, and we want to tell an audience why it's important. So that's what curation is, and the reason it became important is actually so curation always happened. I mean, museum curators have always been there.
Right.
You could say that newspapers editors are content curators, so it's not something new. The reason we've been talking about curation this past few years and it became important online is that the web has totally changed our ability to create content. And we've moved from a system which was, up until the last century, all of the technology in media have only done one thing: increase the number of people who could consume content, but not so much increase the number of people who could create content.
Mm-hmm.
That's something which is really new. This is something which is less than 10-year-old. The technology has totally changed the cycle of content discovery. It used to be that very few people at the top were deciding what millions or billions were consuming. And that model completely changed over the last 10 years because now we can all create content. We can all start a blog. We can all use our smartphones or GoPro cameras to take pictures or create awesome videos.
Right.
And of course now there's what we call information overload, and that's been massively reported. So there's a change. There's a shift of value from creation to curation. Not saying that creation doesn't have any value anymore, but in a world where we have a massive amount of information, people who can extract, find, select, and share the right relevant information and give it some meaning are doing an awesome job. They're helping us save time. They're helping us understand the world. And that's why it's becoming valuable. It becomes valuable for individuals. It becomes valuable for professionals. It becomes valuable for businesses and brands. Because if you can be the person who actually find that content and give it some context, then you can build an audience that will look at you as a resource, as someone in the know, and will want to interact with you.
Yeah.
So that's how we define it and why it became valuable.
Yeah, and the only reason I'm chuckling is because your definition of what a content curator is perfect to describe what a librarian does, which is, of course, what I do. And
Ah, no, so librarians,
yeah,
exactly. Librarians haven't waited for the word to become a buzzword to do this, and
right.
we have a lot of librarians in Scoop.it, or a lot of educators who understand. Educators to me are also curators. They've been defining what type of information needs to be shared, what's going to have an impact with their students. So yeah, there's a lot of common points here.
Actually, I really like that. So there are many points in our lives when we are content curators. All different kinds of positions and jobs require you to be a content curator. I hadn't thought about a teacher being a curator, but I think you're absolutely right when you put it that way. They're figuring out what they're going to share with their students and how to organize it for them, and that's exactly what content curation is. That's terrific. Thank you for.
And I think it's the whole idea of like how knowledge sharing is evolving. And for a lot of people who are, white collars workers or like information workers, as Peter Drucker defined them, decades ago already.
Right.
Like for a lot of us who work in the service industries, we're processing information, we're sharing information. Like marketing becomes educating.
Right.
Selling becomes educating. So it's a lot about how we share knowledge, even in business. And this is why it's so fascinating to me. And disclosure, I'm married with a teacher, so I'm influenced by that as well.
That's great.
A lot of things are around, how you share knowledge becomes really important. If you want to get a new customer on a solution or on a product, you need to educate them about why it is important that they change their behavior, that they give you their budget, and so that is why we're seeing content marketing becoming the new advertising, and content curation being an important part of the way you can do content marketing.
Yeah. So do you see, if we're speaking strictly about online at this point, I mean, we've established that you can look at content curation in a lot of ways, but if we're speaking strictly about online right now, do you see either some differences or obviously some overlap, but do you see very many differences between somebody who's curating content for their own personal use versus, say, a company who's curating content for a particular audience?
Yeah, I'm always careful with the word now because online it means a lot of different things.
Right.
And so, for instance, we've been discussing Pinterest, and a lot of people are curating content for their own usage, and I call this more collection. A collection is not necessarily something you're going to share. Some people do, some people don't. But if you're like collecting ideas for a new kitchen design you're going to be doing in your home, to me, you're doing something different. And I don't care so much whether you want to call that curation or not, but to me, it's different than the act of saying, I want to do something specifically to build an audience, to educate an audience, to engage an audience. And I would say and I see a lot of people on Pinterest do that for their own personal use, and that's great. Pinterest is a great platform. They've been doing a terrific job, but I think for businesses and professionals, we felt there was something else that was needed because those people are primarily using it to build an audience, to engage an audience. Sometimes it could be internal. We have large corporations who use a private version of Scoop.it to curate content for internal communication.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still about building an audience and engaging an audience. And so to me, that's the big difference. If you're collecting stuff for yourself, you're going to do that in a certain way. But if you're a business, you're likely to be doing that to build an audience, have some specific engagements and audience development objectives associated to that.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the type of user we serve, and the platform is positioned.
Okay, so I see some buzzwords here that I'm beginning to put together for maybe even a title or whatever. But so engage and educate; those are really the primary reasons that a business would use content curation platforms, I would think.
Yeah, and so the main idea is you do it for other people.
Yeah.
That's meant to be shared,
yeah.
Which is different than when you do that for yourself.
And then actually that's very interesting too, because whether it's on Pinterest or if it's on Scoop.it or Digo or any of these other curation tools, one of the things that has become really prevalent is people will then trust, and I actually wrote my most recent blog post that just came out today is with Chris Brogan, and we talked about trust. And so if you have an audience that trusts you and your knowledge and your understanding of a particular topic, then they're going to go to whatever it is you've curated and recognize you as an authority. And so I think there's a lot of elements of that there too.
It's exactly that. It's the way you build an audience is really by building trust, by being consistent, by showing that you've been doing great work at selecting the right content, giving it some context and meaning. And you're right. This word is very important. And when I mentioned earlier, like it's about becoming a resource. It's about building that trust, saying, "Oh, if I want to learn something about this particular topic, I know this and this person are actually the guys the go-to people
Right.
I would consult. And that's where the opportunity really is for for professionals. We tend to call that thought leadership or personal branding. For businesses, we tend to call that content marketing. I actually see that as pretty much the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's the idea that you're going to build trust authority by in a way that helps you develop an audience,
Right.
uh, and that's going to help you show some expertise you have by sharing knowledge. That to me, this is all the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you give us some examples of companies that are using content curation really well so that I can perhaps show those to some of my students? I've been talking to my students about it, and I know it's happening, but it's hard to do like a search for companies that are doing content curation well. Have you recognized some at this point that are doing
Sure.
it?
And so a couple of things on this. So first, this idea that you can build an audience by curating other people's content. It's been debated, but we wanted to bring a figure of like we launched about 2 years ago,
Okay.
the public version of Scoop.it. And as we celebrated our 2 years, we also reached a very interesting milestone. Is we're close to 100 million accumulated unique visitors on the platform.
That's great.
Uh, so our community of curators have brought to the platform 100 million people. So when we talk about building audiences, we're not talking about small numbers. This is
Right.
starting to be very significant, and they've curated jointly 50 million pieces of content. So it starts to scale in a very nice way.
Hmm.
Uh, and to give you some examples, we have uh, professionals, small businesses, mid-sized businesses, all the way to larger companies using Scoop.it. Um, some of the independent professionals are really interesting example. We have some who have more than 1 million views on their topic pages by being consistent. An example I love to give is a woman called Lauren Moss. She's in Orange County. She's an architect,
Hmm.
and she has about 100,000 different people have seen her page in architecture.
Wow.
And she's specializing in sustainable architecture. She has a great page, very engaging.
Okay.
That's just to show you that just by, and of course she's not doing that 100% of her time
Right.
because her day job is to be an architect. And so it shows that by spending minimum amount of time, she's been able to build that a great audience. Talking about businesses, we have we did an interesting case study with the University of San Francisco here in the Bay Area. They've done something which I think a lot of brands are trying to build, which is how do I build an audience doing curation, but by also involving a community. A lot of brands have been thinking about like how do I make my community contribute to my content. It's actually very hard for the reasons we've been talking initially, is that people are not always very good at creating content.
Right.
Well, what those guys have been doing is they've been using Scoop to curate the best content created by the universities, faculty, students, all of the stakeholders in their community, and they've built a great page. And they've been trying to do that for a few years. They've only done that with Scoop for a few months,
Hmm.
and in about 6 months, they did 3 times as much traffic as what they've done in the previous 3 years. So,
Interesting.
very interesting case study for us.
Yeah.
Um, Larger companies, we have the HRs of PepsiCo, which are using Scoop.it to not for the consumer market, but really to show that it's great to work at PepsiCo. So really focusing on HR topics.
Okay.
Here in the Bay Area, we have large and smaller startups. Pretty big startup called Ring Central is doing a pretty awesome job as well. So we have
Great.
all sorts of examples.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. I will try to look those up and see what they're saying on their curation pages.
And I
Um,
can send you some links if you want as
yeah, that
well.
would be terrific. That would be terrific. I'd love that. I'd love to include them. Um, going off just a little bit, how do you see curation tools like Scoop.it intersecting with some of the other social media platforms that aren't necessarily intended for curation? Like Facebook is not a curation tool, Instagram is not a curation tool. Do you see any kind of synergy or intersection between the curation tools and the non-curation, the ones that are specifically just to socialize?
Yeah, so we've always taken a strong view on this, and I don't know whether we differ from other people or not, but typically we see Scoop.it as a hub for your content, and that is something not as a yet another destination you have to maintain. And by that I mean that we've all been frustrated that after we were told we had to be on Facebook, we've been told we have to be on Twitter and on LinkedIn and then
Right,
on Google Plus,
right.
and it's a bit frustrating. So we see Scoop.it as a way to actually feed your social channels. So we tell our users, don't think of Scoop.it as something you need to maintain on top of everything else, but as something that will help you discover content, publish it, and then share it
Okay.
to maintain your presence on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, or whichever channels you want to use.
So
Um,
do you have tools then that push whatever you curate out to those other
right.
platforms? Okay.
And we made that integration very seamless. So you can connect once and for all your Twitter accounts, Facebook pages, LinkedIn. We last week we integrated with LinkedIn company pages.
Okay.
We've had profile integrated for a long time, but now you can share to a LinkedIn company page. And so every time you publish something to Scoop It, you can decide on a post by post basis to send it to LinkedIn, send it to Twitter, to a Facebook page. Nothing gets published if you don't want it, but you can pretty much cross post wherever you want. And that's very important for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
First, we're talking about building audiences and building trust, and this is so it's a way to actually feed those channels and make sure you're consistent on those channels. But that's the way also to bootstrap your audience to your curated content hub.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to start from this. The second reason it's important is that it's also a great way to get some search traffic. Google has been changing their algorithms to include a lot more social signals.
Okay.
And on Scoop.it, we've had 35, 40% of that 100 million visitors coming from social media,
Yep.
about 35, 40% coming from search. And so that's how I think it should work because on social media you're engaging with people who already know you. But most of the time when you're trying to build an audience, you also want to be discovered by people who don't know you. And that's
Right.
what search is going to bring you. So
Right.
we've been thinking a lot about how you build that trust, that reputation with an audience that really cares about the same topics as you do. And social is important to bootstrap. You want to do that, but you also want to reach out to people who don't know you, who are not friends of friends, who are not in your social graph. And that's what we call the interest graph. The people who want to connect, who don't know you but are interested in the same thing. Because whether you want to sell to them or whether you do want to build your brand, those are the people you want to reach out to.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Wow, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. Um, if you were going to be speaking to a group of young people, high school seniors, juniors, or maybe young college students, what kinds of skills would you recommend that they really focus on? Social media skills, kind of, we're talking a little bit broader base now, in order to be really prepared for the information workforce.
So I think the massive trend for people who are interested in social media and online in general is that I would say it's content. We used to be in a world where 10 years ago, for my first startup, content was not so much important. Um, Technology was important. We were building a music platform. Ironically, we were distributing content, so that was a very specific case. But it was really about building those enabling technologies that will allow us to download music on mobile phones or stream music on mobile phones. And
Uh-huh.
so it wasn't so much around content. I think what's happening now is you can't really escape the ability to create good content.
Okay.
Whether it's a tweet, whether it's a blog post, there's a sense of content that's really needed. And even for curators, we were talking about that continuum of creation, curation.
Mm-hmm.
But even when you curate, you want to edit your title, you want to give your insights, you want to find some, you want to give some context, and that means sometimes changing the title to make it more impacting to your audience.
Right.
So I think the ability to understand what differentiates good content from bad content, what are the things that are going to be resonating with an audience. I would say that's the skill I would encourage people to develop.
And actually, that goes right along with a lot of the things that we're teaching kids anyway. I mean, it's really writing. I mean, even if you're doing a podcast or an interview like this, or a video broadcast or whatever. I mean, you still have to prepare. You still have to research. You have to be able to write down what it is you want to communicate. And
Yeah.
and one of the things that we teach kids is in their writing is to have a voice and to know what their message is and who their audience is. So it really doesn't matter what the platform is. Communication is communication. So
And I would even go further than this and say it's not just for people who are interested in social media, but I think, anyone who's like, ambitious for his or her career and, want to generate opportunities. There was, we've always thought that it was not just for business, but also for professionals, thought leadership, showing expertise, showing thought leadership, building your personal brand. Those are all things that, 10 years ago were like, okay, this is just for gurus and really important CEOs but now everybody has to care about it. The chances you're going to get great job opportunities are going to be 5x 10x higher if you're active on LinkedIn and you're publishing great content.
yeah,
So I think we're living in a different world which forces every one of us, either as professionals, businesses, brands, to become media. And so we're saying you're probably not going to be having the time and the energy to create that content for your own self media, but curation is one of the things you can use. But understanding content is really important.
yeah,
And basic skills for curators is recognizing that this is a great piece of content and
yeah,
being and wanting to share it. So
yeah. That's great. All right. So I guess our last question will be, if someone were a small business, either a solopreneur or a couple of people working together to get a business going, and they knew they needed to get involved in some sort of a social media presence, what would you recommend would be some of their first steps?
So I'm gonna I'm gonna sound biased, but I would say
Okay.
curation is actually a great way to start.
Okay.
Here's why. The first thing that and as an entrepreneur, I've lived that, which is like when you start a business, you don't always you want to stay agile. You want to remain flexible, and you don't always know what's going to engage your audience, what's going to resonate. And
Right.
so, if you invest too early in like a very complex blog or a very complex content strategy, it's likely going to be off topic, or it's likely going to fail because you're going to be spending too much time and not knowing the results. Curation is actually a way to have ROI by making the investments much lower. And I would say, the same way that, and we actually have a word for that. We call that lean content. In the same way that there's been a whole movement in the tech industries to move from big startups to lean startups.
Mm-hmm.
The whole idea that I think you interviewed Hidden Shah from
Right.
Kissmetrics. So the whole idea that it's about trying, it's about failing, it's about failing fast and iterating the product. We've
Mm-hmm.
been trying to apply that to content, and this idea that you should be lean with your content initially is very important. So curation, to be concrete, can help you determine which of the 3, 4 different topics is going to be the most interesting for your audience.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be something you can do without spending a lot of time. If you have a business to run, you want to save time.
Right.
It's going to allow you to feed your social channels with content and start building your initial community. And so it's also going to help eventually identify what content you want to create. My rule for understanding where I want to create content is whenever I have an idea in my head and I can't find somebody who wrote about this before, and I know for sure that nobody wrote about this before because I'm a curator, then I'm thinking, oh, wait, nobody's really written or done a slideshare or an infographic on this. We should do it because
Okay.
we'll be first. And you want to create that content that doesn't exist and not replicate the content that somebody else has created.
Oh,
So I would say, curation is a great way to have a lean content strategy that can help you get started.
yeah. I like that a lot. Think of what nobody else has done yet and do that. Yeah, that's great. Well, Guillaume, thank you so much for chatting with us today. This has been terrific. I don't think kids in school understand what content curation is. They just don't think about it because they're not in the habit of using curation tools. They mostly just use the social tools. And yet, if they're going to be going into business, they need to learn how to do these things as well. So that's terrific. I appreciate you spending some time with us. Thanks so much.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
Okay.
Really
Thanks.
appreciate it as well.
Okay. Bye-bye.